Hello, I'm Carla Lauter, and I'm the editor of AEC Next News. And I have Greg Demchak here with us today from Bentley, and he's going to talk to us about 4D and about Synchro and about kind of basically the future of how we're going to start doing real-time project planning. So, Greg, thanks for joining us. And can you give us a little bit of an intro as to what your role is and your background a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carla. So again, my name is Greg Demchak. I run what's called a digital construction laboratory for Bentley. And what that basically entails is I work with customers and third-party development companies, trying to basically prototype and figure out sort of what's next for digital construction delivery.
Cool. Can you give us, for those who aren't familiar, an overview of what Synchro is, what it does, and kind of who's using it?
Yeah, sure. So Synchro, the basic premise of Synchro is it's called 4D. It's a 4D visualization of construction, and 4D is just adding this element of time to digital models, what you might think of as a BIM model. And typically, these are general contractors, subcontractors that will import their construction schedule, a P6 schedule or an ASTA schedule, and then any BIM model, could be Revit, Navisworks, iModels, SketchUp, doesn't really matter. And then the models get linked up to the construction sequence, the Gantt chart, and that produces an immediate visual medium or an immediate way to understand like a construction schedule. And so it's a pivot away from just looking at a Gantt chart as a way to understand um, a sequence of construction activities.
Yeah, and I would imagine too that that's a new way of visualizing what may have been multiple documents back and forth, something where you can kind of instantly look, and I've seen in the app like drag a slider through what's happening, what's
Hmm.
going to happen, and it's just so easy to ID those clash detection type things and dependencies. So have you as you're kind of thinking about 4D, how has the idea of 4D construction, kind of been received by the audience? Like, are people like totally new to this? Are they starting to wrap their heads around the idea? Do they think they now have to wrap their heads around the idea because it's coming
Hmm.
quicker than they imagined? What's the kind of sentiment out there?
Yeah, so I think the sentiment, just if people aren't aware, so 4D goes way back. In fact, the first, I think, example 4D came out of the Walt Disney Concert Hall in California, uh, and that was a simulation done in like 2000. That was even before like even BIM was kind of socialized, and that was complex steel fabrication models that had to be sequenced in a computer. So it's been in the market, it's been in the space for 20 years now, to be honest with you. Um, and I think it's evolved. It's basically evolved along the same timeline as the adoption of 3D modeling and BIM as a workflow. So I see a lot of traction in the market. Just speaking practically, I would say 50 to 60% of all the top 100 general contractors globally are using Synchro today for, at the very minimum, uh, schedule verification and basically validating that their schedule makes sense.
Mm.
And it's also heavily used in tender pursuits. So I think most bids now you see a 4D animation included. And then in pre-construction, heavy use to basically identify risk and iron out the schedule to something that's believable and the team can get behind. And then now the shift, where things are shifting, is away from just an animation as a way to study the schedule, and getting it into the field where the 4D model can become updated in real time. So not just a prediction of the future or view into the future, but also capturing the actual progress. So the model becomes, in a way, a record of what's been complete.
Can you kind of give a little bit more of an example of how that would work, of kind of doing that kind of in the field edition?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I've seen there's a couple clients that we're working with who um, they wanted to see if this is possible. They've been using Synchro for many years for planning and work winning, and they had this idea that could they track the progress of their building, um, using something like RFID scanning and barcoding, so that whenever an object goes through a stage change, right, a delivery, an erection, a connection, that the model gets updated with the timestamp in Synchro. And so that's called a resource status change. In Synchro, all the three elements are called resources, and those resources are assigned to the construction tasks. So it means that, like, a task in the schedule might be, say, a 10-day task and include hundreds of elements. So typically percent complete, someone may be walking around and estimating I'm like 30% done. With this workflow, you can identify the objects either manually selecting them and do a digital update, or with like a barcode scan. You can change the status of each individual piece, and then that contributes to a model-based percent complete computation. So I think it's a really interesting way to tie the BIM content that's already been authored to the schedule, go back to using the BIM element to then inform the schedule.
Yeah, and ground that more in reality and less in estimate, I think is
Yeah,
for one of the challenges that we talk about all the time here on AEC Next is getting rid of that waste or that redundancy or doing things twice. And I think that's a huge step, is getting better data to look at
yeah,
in terms of your progress tracking.
yeah. So I think that's where I see a lot of momentum in the market, and what's enabled that. This is also a shift internally in terms of like how this is. As you know, Synchro was acquired by Bentley Systems about 2 years ago, and we've really shifted the focus towards like a cloud-enabled workflow rather than a file-based scenario. So what allows that to actually work, this idea of like barcoding and RFID scanning and sort of real-time update, that's only really possible when you're in a cloud environment. Like we're used to with our smartphones. You can order food, you can order a car, everything's real time. You're connected to the network. You're not sending files. And so that's been a big focus of Synchro, is to say, no, we're actually, the data, the Synchro model, it's not a file on your desktop. It's a database where all that information is living and can be updated in real time, either through the desktop app or via other connections through the Synchro API.
And can you also talk a little bit too about how mixed reality is kind of coming into that world as well? Because I know you guys are partners with Microsoft for the HoloLens too, and I want to talk a little bit, have you talk a little bit about kind of how mixed reality is playing into that overall workflow as well.
Yeah, yeah, sure. And I've got one with me. Just I was anticipating that question. This is the HoloLens 2, if you can see it. So we got involved with HoloLens with version 1, which actually, to be honest, it was a bit cumbersome to use. It would like kind of weigh on your face. Giving demos was a challenge. You'd have to kind of teach people this air tap thing, and so it was difficult. We had a lot of early adopters that kind of went on that ride with us. And then with this version, it's got kind of like this pop-up head thing. It goes like, oh, I've got my headphones on here, but it goes like right on your head, like so. It's so much easier now, just like this, and you can even pop it up like this. So it's a lot more comfortable and easier to use, and the field of view is also increased. So we've been developing for this, and I think the feedback from our users with this version is it solved a lot of the barriers of adoption that the first one had, just physically difficult to wear and interact with. And one of the things that's been very cool to work with here is that the sensors, the camera sensors, the SLAM sensors that are like observing your world, now they're actually picking up a real-time mesh capture of your hands. And so it's like a digital twin of yourself. And if you can turn it on, and you can see that it's scanning and producing like a real mesh. And so what that means is that you don't have to necessarily look at things to interact with objects. And it's more natural, like how we work. Like I can type on my keyboard, but I don't have to be looking at the keyboard. And so with the HoloLens 2 now, as long as my hand is interacting with the hologram, it accepts I can move things, interact with things. I don't have to be looking right at it. So we built a new app on top of that, and we've been watching people who will put it on and like zero experience with HoloLens or head-mounted displays, and they're moving holograms, they're interacting with it, and they just sort of get it. So I think just the fact that the user experience is so natural, intuitive, it plays perfectly into kind of like the construction market where, if you put an app in front of a construction user, if it's not intuitive and easy to understand, they'll just like toss it right out. So that's a real challenge with introducing technology and software into construction.
So I kind of want to talk a little bit too, just about, obviously we're in the midst of kind of an unprecedented time here. A
Yeah.
lot of people are either pausing work or having to really make drastic adjustments to how work is getting done. Can you talk a
Hmm.
little bit maybe about how technology, even, kind of 4D, can maybe help people who maybe don't have access to a job site as often now with some social distancing, or basically just generally in this
Hmm.
new environment, how we might be using that going forward.
Yeah, so that's interesting. One thing I think that's helpful and people could put to use, like even now, is that again with that Synchro cloud environment, it's called the Synchro work group. That's the Synchro data living in a central server, and it supports multi-user real-time collaboration, both from the desktop and also from any of these edge devices, HoloLens or mobile app, or like I said, even like that RFID scanning. So what it means is that you could be working, like we could be working together on the exact same Synchro data set in real time remotely. And because the transactions are updated instantly. So I'm not even sending a file back and forth. It's not a file up on a shared server. It's literally real time. So even from a support perspective, it's interesting for us because if a customer is running one of these work groups and they have a question, yeah, we can do remote screen sharing, but we can also have one of our support people like join into the Synchro session from their laptop and be in the model directly with the user. So making edits, making changes, fixing it. So even from a support perspective, you don't even have to send files in this point. You're basically solving problems like together in real time and even at distance. And the same thing goes for anything you want to kind of experiment with on your own that maybe is connected to that database via the API. For example, you can take any Synchro model and pull it through. Like we've built a Synchro to Unity extension, basically that you can take any of the Synchro geometry and the animation data. You could pull into like the Unity game engine and build like a custom app if you want to. You could build a VR app. Now we haven't built our own VR app, but I've seen other companies build apps on top of Unity that just where they're just leveraging that content. So those are opportunities out there. And in addition to that, there's also Bentley has this new web-based format which is called iModel.js, which is a new thing that we never had just as Synchro, but Bentley's quite good at, which is basically unlimited scale models running in a web browser. And then that's an open source format. So it's called iModelJS.org. And if you have the knack, if you have the inclination, you can actually get in there and start experimenting with building, say, custom web apps, even if you want. So that I think this idea of like open source and like open APIs, that's where you see like innovation. And as people maybe have some downtime, if you've got an idea in your head, you could really start to dabble in this. And if you have specific ideas, by the way, you could always reach out to me directly, and I can direct you and or people to the right place to get started. But you can think about it as almost just running maybe your own little hackathon if you want.
Right.
Just try things out.
Yeah. What did they say that I think it was Shakespeare wrote some beautiful, play during while quarantined during the plague. But if your company needs a needs a new app, hey, now's the time. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Right, because you could watch the news all day long and just go crazy, or
Yeah.
binge Netflix, or maybe like learn how to write some code and solve some cool problem.
Yeah, are there opportunities too, that, they could be kind of looking at their own business and seeing how digitization could help them, or just help, is this an opportunity essentially for businesses to kind of take a look at what they're doing and see what processes they might need to have in place, if events like this become more common, or just generally, they haven't had the time
Mhm.
to look into new software perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect time. If people have the time, if for example, a lot of job sites are physically shut down right now. So what are you gonna do with that time? Um, Software is a great thing to learn in that free time. Like you can generally get access to the software, you can learn it. We have a ton of online training materials. It's all free, right? YouTube. We have like the Bentley Academy. There's a lot of content out there if you just want to upskill and get comfortable with, well, maybe you've always wanted to know how to build a 4D model. In a week or two of just training, you can actually upskill. And by the way, if you've got access to your P6 schedule or your Revit models or any 3D models, then you can actually just import those directly in and start figuring it out, see what you learn there. So that at a very minimum, you can get to that point quite quickly. Just like, okay, what is 4D? Is a few days of honestly just training, sitting down with the software. And then anything after that is just kind of building on top of that, all of the possibilities for how you could improve construction. And I think the key element here is that, if Synchro brings anything into the equation, it's that the element of time. And then, everything is time. We always are tracking time, but you're able to link time to the model. And the model is the way you're basically telling time and keeping track of time.
It's fantastic. And I think that's inspiring for some folks who maybe are a little tired of sitting on the couch, or kind of, like you were saying earlier, watching the news.
Yeah.
Can you just touch on really quick? I noticed that a new version of Synchro Pro just came out, or, kind of the other day, I think it's last week maybe.
Yep.
And, do you have some highlights for those people who are definitely familiar with Synchro, and kind of what's new in that 2019.2?
Yeah, 2019.2. Let me think about what's in there. I think there's this is a tricky one. It's like I saw the release notes, and I think there's like more like conditional formatting was added, so you can color code. This is quite powerful. You can basically color code anything in the model by any set of properties,
Oh, neat.
and so basically color codes the model conditionally, and that could be task properties, coloring the model by task status. So like is something late or delayed, cost, any user field value. So it's quite nice. It means that you can use any of the metadata in the Synchro mod. That includes properties of the 3D element or the schedule to automatically color code the digital model. That's a big one. The This is not new, but it was new in 2019.1, but a lot of people don't know about it. But we added with resource statuses.
Mhm.
It used to be that you could just track one type of status for an element. So it might be material is like installed, erected, connected. But now we have, you can track multiple criteria of status in time and color the model based on different statuses. So it could be like a health and safety status check versus a material and site check, or it could be a quality check. So it gives you a lot more flexibility to track the status of the model based on whatever criteria you think is appropriate.
And
Oh, and I just remembered another
go
good
ahead.
one, long-standing request, and I think for the Synchro, geeks out there, they will appreciate this, but it's that when you produce an animation, you have these tracks. It's basically the keyframing, which is the time stamp, and then the camera position. And it used to be that you'd create these keyframes in the animation, but if you change the schedule, and they weren't in sync with the animation track. So you'd have to go in and kind of modify all your keyframes to line them up back with the schedule. So if you change the schedule, do a reschedule, the keyframes are now linked to the tasks. So it saves a lot of time and having to like realign everything when you're producing an animation.
So my kind of, I guess my final question is, your role is kind of figuring out what's next, and kind of checking out, what direction you see things going in the future. What is your kind of vision of how all of this is going to kind of evolve and come together? What are you picturing as the future workflows for some of this stuff?
Okay, so yeah, this is a diagram I put together with some colleagues inside Bentley to really talk about um, once you intersect the schedule, which is that yellow line and the blue line, and you kind of hit this 4D point in the road. If you embrace 4D and you go up this path, not just in tendering, but all the way through to commissioning and maintenance, that there's all these interesting opportunities um, in this space. And the stuff in the early section here is already available today, kind of in this band pre-construction. That's all pretty common use cases. Where I'm seeing this next level of innovation, when I have that line, you see that connection between CNC fabrication, the supply chain integration via an API. This is where you've got kind of like at the very edge of innovation, you've got companies now trying to make a connection. So I've got an example of a GC who's now connected with their curtain wall supplier, and that back of house supply chain system, which is tracking, the fabrication, the prefab elements, is sending signals every 24 hours into Synchro. So like the status of every curtain panel is basically known now. So I think that's really interesting. And then we built this ability to pull data out through a SQL exporter, and then that is what allows you to connect Power BI to that. So imagine what this means is that you can now get real-time tracking of, say, discrete manufactured components, and then you can plot that, pull it through into Power BI. So I think it's really powerful, and that's where I see the industry kind of moving. And now if we go to this upper section here where you see computer vision and time-lapse integration, 4D digital capture, this is stuff that I'm currently working on now, building some new prototypes. And I'm actually looking for and have recruiting some early adopters here. And the vision with this stuff is, okay, there's a lot of technology out there that's currently being used to capture reality. So that includes point clouds, photogrammetry, 360 panoramas, and even in time lapse. And so the question is, okay, what does it mean to finally have an integrated solution where all these other capture systems through API connections can tie into a web-based view of that compared against the 4D model. And then if we start to apply AI machine learning there, at first we're talking about users are just doing a visual compare and then updating the status through that to that visual medium. But in doing that, we can basically begin to train an AI machine learning system to start to detect, oh, that's a beam, that's a column, that's a piece of equipment, and then now you've really started to get into this whole conversation about the digital twin, and the digital twin starting with construction, where this digital model is an accurate reflection of what's actually happening, in the physical space. So the fact that within Bentley we've got like sort of top of class photogrammetry solutions like context capture. So that's the team I'm working with is merging all this technology together to try and deliver like a new opportunity for the construction industry.
That is really exciting to kind of see that convergence like on the horizon. That's
Yeah,
pretty awesome.
so
um,
I think it's cool, and it's like all the pieces are there, right? So it's just now it's about kind of connecting the dots, and having that API so that it's not like Bentley we have to solve every single problem. It's more like open up those APIs so that all these other hardware vendors and service providers can basically participate and then plug into it.
yeah, and I think that's in what I've been writing about and the people I've been talking to, that's just so neat because I have seen these little pieces getting solved and figured out, right? And now to kind of see a path forward for them to come together would be really neat.
Yeah. So I'm looking for that's one possible future, and I'm sure as it evolves, there'll be more. So totally
Fantastic.
open. For me, it's like a constant, learning curve. So
Oh yeah.
I
And
love it.
but it is nice. It is nice to kind of have an optimistic kind of look ahead as well. Because I've talked to a lot of people during this crisis, and it's difficult to see kind of outside of the near term, and it's nice to kind of see that this type of development is still coming. So I want to thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, and just your insights on all of this. I can't wait to kind of see how this evolves as well, but also just to see kind of maybe with the downtime what people are doing, and kind of learning to adopt 4D, and just kind of continuing on, trying to be as efficient and and as effective as possible. So thanks so much,
Yeah.
Greg, for joining us here.
Yeah, no problem. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time. And again, any other questions or follow up, just feel free to reach out to me. And
Awesome.
everyone stay safe. And I hope hope things come back soon.
Yeah, you too.